The game has a very unique way of challenging the player. The first level, Green Hill Zone, affords you the ability to play with Sonic's speed. After the success of Sonic the Hedgehog, Sega was looking for a way to capitalize on the character. Sonic 1 became the bundled in-game for the Sega Genesis, and Sega of America and Sega of Japan worked hand in hand to create the sequel. A new sidekick was added, Miles per Hour. However, over time, Miles became known as Tails. Sonic 2 was one of the first Sonic games to have a worldwide release date. Since this was relatively unknown to happen at the time, Sega reps had a hard time coordinating with stores and shipping companies to assure the game was released on time. On November 21st, 1992, a day dubbed Sonic Tuesday, this gimmicky day is part of the reason why so many games, albums, and DVDs are released on Tuesdays now, Sonic 2 launched to critical acclaim. New features include the Spin Dash,
a spin dash that can be startling.
A move which allows Sonic to charge up to his full speed at any time, anywhere. Two-player. A second player can control Tails during play or during a new two-player versus mode.
With awesome new graphics, the new split screen lets two play.
Boosters. An in-stage object which will launch Sonic into full speed. A new special stage which will allow Sonic to collect one of 7 Chaos Emeralds,
10 levels, and a fresh new half-pipe.
And last but not least, the Supersonic transformation. A new transformation for Sonic unlocked if a player collects all 7 Chaos Emeralds. Supersonic first appeared in the 1992 game Sonic 2. A similar transformation for Goku first appeared in April 1st, 1991, a full 2 months before the first Sonic the Hedgehog game was released. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is considered by many to be the best game the series has to offer. But is it all really downhill after the second entry, or has nostalgia blindsided the fan base? I mean, even the most beautiful valleys are downhill from something. Immediately after putting in the game, the jump in quality is overwhelming. Usually I wait to talk about visual style of a game until the end, but the visual upgrade is amazing. Although Sonic 1 had an appealing color palette, the saturation in Sonic 2 is boosted up to 11. I guess you can say the reason behind this new vibrancy is that they upgraded Green Hill Zone to Emerald Hill Zone, so essentially Vibrant Green Hill Zone. One of the concepts played around with in Sonic 1 was level branching. Essentially, you could play the same level without taking the same path. However, Sonic 2 improves upon this immensely. Not only are there alternate paths to be taken right from the start, but the game also makes it easier to go back and forth between different paths, so several playthroughs of the same level might be all different. Sonic 1 really wanted to make the players feel as if they were going fast. With parallax scrolling and several stage props, it accomplishes this very well. However, Sega really wanted to up the sense of speed for this entry. Right from the beginning, there's new stage sets, including corkscrews and a bunch of those loops from the first game. Heading right on into the second level, Chemical Plant Zone. The levels that really benefit from the branching pathways are the water levels. Instead of being forced like the first game, the water levels in Sonic 2 are kind of unnecessary. And I don't mean that they don't add anything to the game, I mean that if the player knows which pathways to choose and is skillful enough, they can actually avoid the water entirely. Unlike Marble Zone, the second level in Sonic 1, which significantly slows down the gameplay to allow for platforming, Chemical Plant keeps the momentum going while providing some notorious platforming moments. It's impossible to mention Chemical Plant Zone without mentioning speed boosts. The Sonic the Hedgehog fan base has always been divisive, and it really started with the speed boosts introduced in Sonic 2. My opinion? I don't really have an opinion. Sonic's Spin Dash ability does the exact same thing these boosts do, and that can be used at any time. They're just aesthetically pleasing. Moving on to Aquatic Ruin Zone. It's a water level. And just like Chemical Plant Zone, if you're skilled enough, you can actually avoid going underwater. Now, I am not one to get nauseous over watching movies or playing games, but the parallax scrolling in this level is just too much. See, Sonic is one of the first games to implement a depth technique called parallax. Parallax is when objects at different distances appear to be moving at different speeds. It's actually how astronomers measure the distance between stars. So Sonic utilizes this in order to create a sense of depth between the background and the foreground. In Sonic 2, the game began to get really ambitious with how many different depth planes objects will be placed in. Aquatic Ruin Zone at some points has foreground objects, Sonic's plane of field, and multiple layers of background objects all at once. And when Sonic moves and all the other objects move in accordance with his movements, it really gets disorienting, especially after you're playing for a while. Next, we get to fan favorite level Casino Night Zone. It's fun, it's creative, and it feels good, especially when you get a jackpot and collect a bunch of rings. The casino style zones became a staple of the series after this, so it's always cool to go back and see the series at its roots. Hilltop Zone. Definitely one of the more platform heavy levels in the whole game. After Hilltop Zone comes Alexandria Zone, then Negan Zone, then Point of View Shot while potentially your favorite character is Murdered Zone. There's the weighted jumps you have to time and make. platforms that will fall if you stay on them too long, and lava that rises at certain points with falling platforms sprinkled throughout. Mystic K-Zone is frustrating, yet a fair level. There's a series of breakable platforms and pulleys, so you have to pull a lever first, lowering the platform, jump on a breakable platform, and back onto the lowered one all before it crumbles. All to avoid falling into a pit of spikes. Spikes are everywhere, but that's okay because this level is also littered with the invincibility power-ups, and those power-ups are really needed in this stage. Not only are the spikes scattered in every which way, but a lot of the enemies here are difficult to kill. You have a snake-like enemy which ambushes you and can only be killed by jumping directly on top of his head, and fireflies which can only be killed when they aren't fire-flying. But don't worry, the fireflies last a tragically short amount of time. Your fox companion usually makes sure that they don't have any time to develop. Mystic Cave Zone also provides a ton of alternative route options. In the iPhone port of the game, a whole new level can be accessed through Mystic Cave Zone. However, in the original version, there's just a pit that is impossible to jump out of. And I mean impossible, not just really difficult. This is one of those notorious parts of the game, and it's a pretty big blemish. Sliding on into Oil Ocean Zone, we see that Sonic slides around. There are some green caps that blow off of a flame, and you're never quite sure when it's going to happen, and it happens quick. So you'll try to jump on top of it before it blows, but it will happen mid-jump, so you end up hitting the fire every time. Also, this level is filled with too many cinematic moments. Sonic sliding around and going through Donkey Kong cannons, etc. Now we get to Metropolis Zone, the last proper zone. This is probably by far the hardest levels in the whole series. The enemies in the level consist of a mantis, which will throw its arms at you. They're nearly impossible to avoid. A crab with a hammer claw, which is also nearly impossible to avoid. And little star guys which explode and send pins in a million directions, which are incredibly impossible to avoid. The level is also filled with difficult platforming and some of the most obnoxious pattern recognition in any game ever. Sky Chase Zone, the beginning of the end of the game. Sky Chase Zone sees Sonic and Tails flying up to Dr. Robotnik's winged fortress. This is one of the most uneasy levels I've ever played, because even though Tails will always be right under Sonic, I'm constantly on edge thinking that Tails will miss me and I'll fall to my death. This takes my focus off of concentrating on avoiding enemies and causes me to die. The level leads directly into Winged Fortress Zone, a relatively straightforward level except for some perspective platforming that is a little confusing. And finally, we see Death Egg Zone, one of the most artificially hard levels in the history of forever. In Death Egg Zone, you have to figure out how to beat two incredibly hard bosses with no rings. Each of these bosses has specific patterns that they attack in, and at times it's hard to tell when and where it is appropriate to attack them. Throughout the game, most of the bosses are incredibly easy, and at times you can beat them before you even have an understanding on their attack patterns. And other times you can quickly pick up on the patterns and just wait for an appropriate time to attack. But here, not only are the patterns highly unpredictable, especially with the first boss, but you have zero rings throughout the level and therefore no opportunity for trial and error or to learn their patterns. The Sonic series has one of the most diverse level selections in any series ever, and Sonic 2 really laid down the groundwork for that. You have the Green Hill Zone clone, the City Zone, Robotnik's base, the Sky level, etc. Sonic 2 has been the standard for the series ever since it came out, and it's deserving of that title. Even the annoying special stage has been copied over 1,000,000 times. However, once again, like its predecessor, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is not a perfect game. Many of the flaws from the first one still persist into the second one, including the problems with memorization, especially with the Death Egg Zone, in which you don't have opportunities to memorize it because you don't get any rings within the beginning of a very difficult stage. Sonic 2 is what every Sonic game is based off of after this, not even just the level variety either. Sonic is given a new ability, a new character is added, and the feeling of grandiose is built up. Sonic 2 is to the Sonic series as Mario 3 is to the Mario series. Sonic 1 laid the basic groundwork, characters, gameplay, and setting, while Sonic 2 took that and expanded upon it. However, did the series really peak after the second entry? I think it's safe to say yes. Sonic 2 isn't only possibly the best Sonic game, but also cemented Sonic as a video game icon. Sonic became massive after Sonic 2. In 1993, two different TV shows were based on the character and were airing at the same exact time. Sonic became the first video game character to have a float in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, and it even caught the attention of the world's biggest celebrity. One of the most interesting things to come out of his intense popularity was a poll that Sega conducted. The poll asked children to identify cartoon characters, and more kids were able to identify Sonic over Mickey Mouse. It's hard to think about it now, but Sonic was a huge icon at one point, and if it wasn't for this game, that wouldn't have ever been. Even though Sonic the Hedgehog 2 laid the groundwork for the series and set such a high precedent for what was to follow, the next entry might be just as good, and debatably even better.